Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review episodes 22, 23, and 24 of Extreme Ghostbusters. I like to do these in like a 3 episode interval because that is about like an hour's worth of footage instead of just going and doing one singular episode that is just only like 20 minutes of how short should I make this video? Should I just be like, hey, that episode was great, and then like call it a day? But thank you guys for otherwise consistently watching these. I have fun talking about them, and also some of these episodes are kind of fun. But also these episodes do kind of feel kind of reminiscent or reflectant of some kind of episodes of previous past, or whichever, going into the real Ghostbusters episodes, or just kind of remembering certain things that ended up popping into my brain while going into here. So thank you guys for otherwise watching this, but let's get into the teeing it up of these episodes. So really, episode 24 or no, wait, 22 is to, I almost did it in reverse there. 22 is to be a kind of a episode that you could probably reflect on, because it seems like we have a ghost coming from a mirrored world, and all of a sudden that also leads us to have two demonish monsters who are to eventually maybe try to get the Ghostbusters into the mirrored world, but doesn't quite work out that way. Doesn't quite work out quite as easily as these mirrored characters would believe, because a lot of this is just to eventually get one by one, but there's this kind of slow kind of tricking into this thing, and we have certain characters who eventually kind of figure out this fairly quickly. I don't know, it kind of always makes you wonder who probably out of the group is probably the most smartest out of everyone. I wonder if they were to have all bizarrely just taken a test and actually shown who is actually the smartest one, out of all of them, just to especially between Garrett, Roland, and Kylie, because Eduardo, I think he has a certain kind of he kind of fills in the gap when everybody else doesn't have knowledge about some kind of he's kind of the pop culture guy, or he's kind of usually the if somebody else doesn't know it, he does kind of thing. So so after this episode, we are to have a Fenris episode that is to eventually land us into having this kind of containment unit episode that might be very familiar to a lot of people, because I remember in the real Ghostbusters episodes, there had been plenty of times where eventually a Ghostbuster would have to go into the containment unit or retrieve something out of the containment unit, and it kind of feels like the next 2 episodes after that kind of go into that territory where it's a retrieval of something from the containment unit to be out of the containment unit, or there's just that kind of just consistent kind of element here within these other 2 episodes. And also we kind of have to me, I feel the 24th episode is kind of a boogeyman-esque kind of episode. If you guys of course remember the one Egon episode where Egon was to be terrified of the boogeyman, to where eventually towards the end of that real Ghostbusters episode he ended up having to face the boogeyman. Kind of the same element in the 24th episode, where we have Kylie who kind of has to face her fears, or has to make up for a mistake that she made years ago and try to rectify it. So, but yeah, I really did enjoy these episodes. They were really, there was probably the 22nd episode was kind of it was just kind of you can take it or leave it. But I think the episodes that we get after this are a lot of fun, just to kind of experiment Especially the next episode after the 22nd, of course, the 23rd, that you finally actually get to see what's inside the containment unit for once. Like, I think a lot of people have been pondering that for like years to just be like, okay, what would the containment unit actually look like on the inside of it? Like, I guess a lot of people don't want to be on the inside of it because we really have like a fear of death to be happened. But still, like I think a lot of people like just wanted to like, but I want to know, like I want to know what it looks like. I want to see like how this is all broken down. Plus, also there is a little bit of things here and there that are reminiscent from other episodes in the episode after the into the 23rd episode. Like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, that's from so and so episode, that's from like Fear Itself, or that's from like the Banshee episode, or that's from like this little thing, or hey, like this looks familiar from this episode, and dot to dot dot dot. And so people could be like putting all that together and just be like, oh yeah, I remember this, this looks very much like this episode. So, but yeah. So yeah, like basically that's the explanation in a very like cryptic talk or whatever about these episodes. But people, I hope enjoy it. Will enjoy these episodes if they go and watch any of them, or just want to hear me talk about them, just because they're like, oh yeah, I remember this episode, or oh yeah, like I blah 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 blah. Like I've always kind of found that would be interesting as well. Blah blah blah. Anyways, so let's get into it. Let's go into spoilers about these episodes, so we can go and get them out of the way and say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time you do spoil this episode. So, very beginning of this, we have a old lady. Friggin', whenever you like think of an old lady, you're probably just gonna naturally assume one, whatever house that she's in is probably haunted, because that's usually the case in a lot of Extreme Ghostbuster episodes. Or two, like this is just some weird lady that just has lost her marbles, and but there's like some ghost in part of house. Or three, more than likely this woman has just some like ghostly thing that is to like maybe inhabit her for a certain period of time, but then jump maybe to person. I don't know. It could be any number of things, but usually old ladies in Ghostbuster episodes are just like, we're gonna freaking just turn the beam on her, just see what happens. That's a horrible thing to say, but like freaking batting like 1,000, that usually this old lady is usually a ghost. So we have Kylie in the beginning of this episode talking to Miss Hardenbauer. What kind of a name is that? Hardenbauer? Anyways, so they're kind of looking throughout the entire house and just to kind of like see what Mrs. Hardenbauer is talking about, because Mrs. Hardenbauer is saying that her husband is just a little like a little non-normal. Like it seems that there's something off about him. Like I was like thinking like, what are we, like Invasion of the Body Snatchering, like where like this guy is to be like a ghost of sorts or a monster or whichever. Anyways, but what ends up happening is Eduardo is to look at this mirror on the wall, like big, huge kind of like mirror where it's like the size of his bate. And so Edward looks at this mirror and he's like, man, what an attractive looking guy. And that all of a sudden sucks Eduardo out of his own body. And then Eduardo is a ghost. And so, because all of a sudden we have Eduardo who is like to be like called out by Roland and Kylie to get up, and Eduardo was like, come up, like what are you guys talking about? All of a sudden we see Eduardo, who is ghost on floor, or his dead body on floor, I mean. So because eventually a ghost or a demon or whatever we call these things, I like to call everything a ghost, even though it's like, oh no, well this episode is actually a demon, this one is actually an apparition, this thing is actually a Poltergarian Geisten thing that comes from Japanish culture and so and forth. And like, and I'll be like, I don't know. I just like, if anything, it's very like the thing that I'm kind of upset about is a lot of these ghosts don't actually have a name. Like, can't you just pop out a name every single episode? Just call him like Mirror Master or like Mirror Man or something. Like, call him like freaking like Reflection or Reflector or something. Like, come up with a name with these things every time. Like, wouldn't that be great to just have like always a book that pops out and says, "Oh yeah, this is Fenris," or this is Gobbledy Gobbledy Good Time Ghost. Yeah, that's who he is. Because I guess I could probably go and like Wikipedia like every single episode, and they'll probably have names of every single one of them. But I'm like, man, that seems like actually doing research. But I guess I could go into doing it, but I didn't think about that. I was like, no, I'm just gonna just enjoy these episodes, and I'm not gonna go into thick, thorough research, and like really try to like investigate, like because I thought the episode would just do that for me. Like, I don't know. So, anyways, so Eduardo is now Ghost. Boo-hoo for him. But here's the weird thing. So Eduardo is such a ghost that even like Slimer can't see him, which is weird. And like Eduardo like isn't as like it's like it does like Eduardo doesn't look as like Slimer, which I'm just kind of confused. Like, is there like a halfway thing that like I don't quite get that. Like, I don't quite understand why like Eduardo can't be seen by Slimer because Ghost. I guess because Slimer can be seen by people, so Eduardo can't. Like, I don't know. That's a whole weird, goofy thing about this episode. So, what eventually ends up happening is that Eduardo is to try as demoned Eduardo or possessed Eduardo. Eduardo is trying to eventually get certain Ghostbusters to look at the reflection. Like, he tries to get Garrett, but eventually he breaks this dish. And so Egon's like, we got a call. Why do I have to point in the air? I don't know. And so Garrett is like, okay, great. Because they were eating, and so Eduardo was happy to do the dishes. And like, we have Janine that's harping on Garrett because he doesn't do the dishes. And so Garrett's like, I'll do the dishes. And so he goes and does the dishes with Eduardo. I think Eduardo just wanted to suck somebody into these dishes, bizarrely. It's weird. So they end up getting a call, and it's bizarrely Miss Hardenbaugh, or it's Mr. Hardenbaugh, calling the Ghostbusters over back to their house to say, hey, yeah, like I called you guys originally because my wife just seemed weird, but then eventually it just seemed like once you guys came here, it seemed like she was perfectly fine. And it's like, okay, what the heck is going on here? What is the rigmarole? But then eventually they, like, the ghosts, like, Roland is to, like, poke him with a PKE meter and just be like, yeah, there it goes. And so all of a sudden they have to forcibly show themselves as these demon, or, like, kind of, like, scary-looking ghostly neighborinos. And so what ends up happening is Garrett ends up trying to get one of the ghosts, and Eduardo is to obviously push him. And so Garrett is just like, you know what? Like, you pushed me, like, Eduardo, and Eduardo was like, nah, that was probably something else. That was the wind. That was like, that wasn't me. No, no, man, no. Like, here's also the thing: wouldn't all the other Ghostbusters find it suspicious that Eduardo is not wearing a proton pack? Does that bother anybody else? Like, he's the only one that doesn't have a proton pack on. What was Eduardo doing, coming in here with hopes and dreams of catching a ghost today? No one realized that, like, how everybody consistently puts on proton pack, but Eduardo doesn't. What's up with that? What's up with my hands also? What's going on here? What am I doing? I don't know. So, uh, Garrett, like, figures it out that supposedly Eduardo has turned. And so, what ends up happening is that, Eduardo then kind of pushes Garrett into this mirror, and he ends up getting freaking ghosted. He ends up getting ghosted. And so, like, Eduardo was like, dude, you had him! You had him in your grasp! You could have, like, this could have worked out. So, what eventually ends up happening is all of a sudden we have, bizarrely, Garrett can all of a sudden, it's a miracle he can walk again. And so everybody's like, what is going on? Like, if anything, it seems like Garrett is acting really strange. Because we also have Roland, who is, like, being very suspicious of Eduardo. Because it's like, Eduardo's eating mayonnaise. Like, he never eats mayonnaise. And he's never this polite. And he like, is gonna dye his hair green in this episode. Like, it's a joke. But Roland is just really suspicious of Eduardo, so much so that he's like, you know what? I think there's something up with this guy. So what eventually ends up happening is everybody is starting to pull, like, the John Carpenter's The Thing, where now they, like, Egon is just like, well, hey, how about we solve this way? Well, like, we'll kind of bip freaking PKE on everybody, and if any of the PKEs just go off the chain, then we obviously know, like, there's a ghost inside someone, and that they're possessed. And so all of a sudden, when Egon and the group are making it to the PKE meters, all of a sudden the PKE meters don't work. And then all of a sudden we start to have accusations being thrown between people. But eventually we just finally have Eduardo come out to just be like, yeah, like, I'm going to freaking just get you people. And so Eduardo just tosses Roland into this, like, computer and, like, ghosts him. And then it's like, well, like, I guess we figured it out. Like, it was Eduardo all along. So all of a sudden we start to see, like, all the Ghostbusters starting to get all into these like, reflective surfaces. We also had, like, Slimer, who also got like, ghosted again twice. So let's do the math on this one. Slimer was already a ghost, but then eventually he saw his reflection, and then he turned into double ghost. And so, like, and we also have Eduardo and Garrett that were sucked into the Mirrorverse because they looked into the mirror and saw this whole world. And so, like, the monsters that live in this Mirrorverse, like, pulled Eduardo and Garrett in. And so Slimer is gonna, like, try to, like, say something to anybody, but eventually Slimer goes in and tries to save both Garrett and Eduardo from this mirror master character, this mirrored man, let's just say, or reflected man. I don't know what they call them. Wikipedia, to the rescue. They probably just call them Ghost. No, so, anyways, so what eventually ends up happening before Egon is, like, sucked into being a ghost is Egon comes up with these ghost gloves that someone is to wear to be able to take these ghosts and to make them be seen more like Slimer. Like, but they are to be, like, electrified, like, somehow to be, like, a much more ghostly thing. It's a weird kind of concoction that they come up with this episode to kind of conveniently be able to see a ghost better. I don't know. So, So what eventually ends up happening is Kylie is the only one left that hasn't been turned into a ghost yet. So she goes into the bathroom, and after she rips a vicious or wicked freaking just, she goes and she's like, oh no, the mirror's got me. And then it's like, oh, the last hope. Like, man, this sucks. And so hopefully she wasn't sucked in there while she was in, because that would have been awful. So that's always what I do when someone goes into the bathroom. I can't help it. I can't help that I have to make that joke. So eventually the Ghostbusters are open the door and like, Kylie, join us. It's great. But we find out that Kylie is actually playing. She's pulling off the Invasion of the Body Snatchers thing, where she's like being emotionless, like all the others are, to just kind of play off of them. So Kylie is to like see these things like go off, and so Kylie is to like try to help out the other people and just try to like figure out how to help them. So eventually, like Egon, the demon possessed Ghostbusters come back, and they're like, you know what, Kylie? Like, I'm not quite sure if you're possessed or not, because we can't figure that out. So, like, because we should be able to just be like, hey, demon? No? Well, we'll have to put a correction on that. So Egon goes and like, hey, Kylie, how about you look in this mirror? Like, how about you just go ahead and just go in there. Just look at. So Kylie is to all of a sudden have Demon come out, and they're like, aha, like, you are a liar. So, but Kylie doesn't get ghosted, and then all of a sudden we end up finding out that like they can change the frequency of the proton pack to eventually take the possessed monster out of someone. I'm like, well, man, that information would have been nice for Ghostbusters 1, right? With the whole Terror Dog situation and Dana and Lewis, and, you know, like, that would have helped out quite a bit. Because, like, you have the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper, like, shouldn't they have figured that out in Ghostbusters 1? I guess not, because they had to come up with that years later. So, Roland is to be the first one up to eventually get back into his body, and because he's like wrestling with himself. But then eventually Roland gets back into his body when Kylie takes the ghost out of him. So the next one up is to be Egon, and then we like slowly but surely start to get everybody like back to being themselves. But now we're having to find like where Eduardo and Garrett are, which are in the mirrored verse. That's what I'll call it, the mirrored verse. So Slimer goes after them, grabs them, and chucks them back into their body. And so what eventually happens at the end of this episode is they just break this mirror. Just be like, yeah, we're not taking any chances. Like, we're not taking any chances for a while. So the next episode is to be like a bunch of people are just at this like I'll say it's a lake or a river, ocean, like a big span of water, let's say. So all of a sudden they're like, we're having a great time, and like, hey, like, why is all of a sudden this water just frozen? Are we gonna let it go anytime soon? Probably not. Whoops, we already did. So all of a sudden we have this, like, I call it Ice Hound for right now because I actually know the name, but I'll call it Ice Hound for right now. We have this Ice Hound so that way people can understand the description. Like, it looks like a terror dog to me, but like they call it a hound or a dog, like, but it's like, I guess I'll call it Ice Hound. I don't know why I have to do this visual, but it like jumps out of the iced waters and into where the location of people are. And so all of a sudden we horrifically just see a dog come to the defense of this people. And so like the Ice Hound goes and ices this dog. But like, it seems like the dog is okay, but I'm still like, that's a horrific thing to do. You're gonna ice a dog in in the show? What's up with that? They also ice Slimer in this episode. I'm like, dude, that's almost as equivalent of dogs, sadly, because we never find the actual real soul of Slimer. That would seem like an odd episode. Let's find the real soul of Slimer. Yeah, let's go ahead and find that. So So this ice hound, we are to like quickly find out that this thing is to be a ice hound called Fenris, and so man, is that great. Here's also the thing: when we queue up going into the Ghostbusters, we have another hot weather episode. I guess they didn't realize that it's gonna get really cold pretty soon. So, uh, like we have Slimer who is desperately getting snacks from Eduardo, and so they end up getting a call, and so the Ghostbusters are to go and find whatever this thing is and try to combat it, and Egon is to quickly find out that it's Fenris, and so Egon is to mention that Fenris evidently is to supposedly enslave three souls and to cause this whole like Ragnarok kind of scenario that is to open the gateway for a ghost called Cert who is in the containment unit that supposedly the original OGs or Ghostbusters had taken Cert out years ago. I'm like, where is that episode? Let me know in the comments below. Like, yeah, they took out certain like season 3 episode whatever that is a episode that doesn't exist because nobody wants to get sued here. Anyways, like so you're gonna start to see a pattern emerge where we all of a sudden have like, hey guys, we captured the original like so and so monster because Egon is original Ghostbuster, and so he has to mention about original ghosts that they bizarrely caught in some previous episode, as if I'm tossing a basketball behind me for whatever reason. So they end up trapping Fenris into this trap like a normal ghost would, but bizarrely we have like some like electricity coming from this ghost, and so Roland is trying as quickly as humanly possible to try and put this trap in the containment unit because it's a hot trap, and like it's also very attractive, I'm sure too, to a lot of people. All of a sudden, we bizarrely have this trap like doing the weirdest thing that we have never really quite often seen. So this trap opens, and all of a sudden Fenris comes out of it, but also so does like starting to have a number of containment unit ghosts coming out as well. And so Slimer is just like, well, like considering all these guys are having like difficulty figuring out what to do, Slimer just goes in there and just like tackles and like pushes all the ghosts back into the containment unit. What a good job that he did for this one episode. But then eventually he'll just eventually do something bad also because it's Slimer. So eventually Egon is to tell about the 3 enslaved ghosts that are supposed to happen. But here's the goofy thing. Like none of the Extreme Ghostbusters can figure out what to do to be able to take down Fenris. And so they're just kind of putzing around a lot. They're just kind of like trying to shoot at Fenris, but like they don't know what to do exactly. So now we have to figure out how to get Slimer back from out of the containment unit, because basically Slimer is probably getting tortured in there just because like Slimer has done some horrible things to certain ghosts. Like probably not any of the ones that you probably see on screen in any number of these episodes, because this is Extreme Ghostbusters and like they go and like create all new ghosts specifically for this episode with some exclusions of stuff from Fear itself or some kind of random episodes here or there. Like there is, of course, the Banshee and the Siren who end up coming back for this episode, which I think was kind of cool to at least have some kind of something from a previous episode, because it could have just had a bunch of random ghosts. Like it was just kind of sad that we didn't get Stay Puft and Marshmallow Man in this episode. I was like, man, previous like in real Ghostbusters when Peter would go into the containment unit, and like Egon would also go into the containment unit too. You would see a lot of that happening through the real Ghostbusters. And eventually you would see like Stay Puft like in the containment unit. He was like, like I'm having a good time. And so like that was always kind of cool to me to see like freaking like Stay Puft just like in the containment unit, just chilling, just like pimping, you know. So so what ends up happening is Fenris is to go and attack Egon and freeze him up to where like Egon was supposed to go into the containment unit, and so like Egon was asking for Roland's help, and so he ends up getting having this frozen ability, and so Eduardo is to come back and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna help you guys out, and Roland, you can just man the containment unit, and I'll just go in there. So while Eduardo is making his way to find Slimer through the containment unit, because bizarrely they have this like now like kind of like I would call this God, what is the easily equivalent? They have this kind of like submarine containment unit door now off to the side of it that they perfectly manufacture for this one episode, where all of a sudden there's this door that can be opened off to the side of the containment unit, and then you can walk in there, close the door, and then like someone can open the door. Like it's kind of like a lot of those like spaceship movies where you have like the ceiling of like air to be put into certain places to oxygenize some room. That's even a word, oxygenize, whatever. So Eduardo goes off into the containment unit, and I guess like the door is to seal behind him, and he has to have this one like clickety click remote to open up this door again. So that's just gonna work out, I'm sure. So while that's happening, we basically have Garrett, who ends up getting basically ghosted, and then Roland is to eventually get attacked by Garrett, which leads to eventually Roland turning into. So, like, basically, Fenris has done his job, but Cert is not going to be able to come out because he's in the containment unit. So, Kylie is just like, well, I guess we're just like, we're SOL. So because Cert is like the big villainish guy that's in the containment unit, because bizarrely like this episode has to be written like perfectly for like to a T, that the big threat is like Cert, so it's not like the umpire from the Real Ghostbusters episode Night Game, or like Ooga Booga from like the Halloween door, because that would be a previous thing that someone will probably get sued for not like, hey man, like freaking. But they can use it in the intro. Like they can use previous designs from Ghostbuster stuff from like. How is it that they can do it in the intro, but they can't do it in actual episodes? Like that just bothers me. Like, would there be some kind of like they can do certain kind of credits, but like anything beyond that in an actual episode to reflect on something, like would they have to give some kind of credit to someone and they didn't want to do that? Like, was that like the I don't get that. Like, I'm trying to figure that out. Like, like, where does intro begin, but like episode no? How does that work? Like, did somebody just not want to do royalties for anybody? I don't know. Like, I guess the Egon thing, that had to be like a forced thing, right? Like, it was like, yeah, we have to do royalties for that one, but like, we want to save a buck everywhere else. Hence why I think the same people that did Jumanji was the same people that did Extreme Ghostbusters. Check out that. Check out the animated Jumanji show, and like you'll kind of feel like it has like the exact same kind of approach, because probably whoever company did all this was like, dude, we're gonna have these people like work overtime, just freaking have them do 2 separate episodes, because it looks like the exact same people did. Like, it seems like the same people working on 2 different shows. So, because I'm sure they like prep these like ahead of time. So, uh, so pushing on here. So eventually, what ends up happening is Eduardo is to go through the containment unit and eventually easily find Slimer. And so he's like, "Oh, hey, buddy! Like, yeah, let's get out of here." And we end up having Slimer like picking up Eduardo to get to the point back where like they originally were. And so Eduardo is just like, you know what, this seems all too easy, because what we ended up having was Slimer went into one part of the containment unit after getting like kind of like flung around by a couple of ghosts. Eventually, Cert was to have both Banshee and Siren there, and Siren was to control Slimer to kind of persuade him to work for Cert. So uh, eventually, when Eduardo is trying to figure this out, where it's like, you know what, isn't this the thing that the ghosts want for me to open up this door for everybody to just Halloween door their way out? Like, there's something fishy about this, and this seems all too easy. And like you know what, give freaking Eduardo props. Like, you know what, like sometimes he comes off as an idiot or an imbecile or whatever, but there's also those times where it's like, how is it that this man is like churning these wheels? Because story, because writing, because like Eduardo has to like be this like investigative like detective or whatever. Like he just has to like really just kind of be paranoid severely, and maybe that's the way that he can just live through every one of these episodes compared to everyone else. So, or maybe he just knows these kinds of stories, or maybe he's just like pop culture guy that it's like, you know what, like this seems all too easy. Like there had to have been some hoops that I needed to jump through before getting. So what ends up happening is that Slimer tries to get the garage door opener technically from Eduardo, and Eduardo crushes the thing, and so Slimer turns evil and like kills Eduardo's oxygen supply. So Eduardo is like, I'm like Slimer, I know you didn't do anything bad, whatever. So like Eduardo is like, I'm going to die, basically. So Serta's just like, well, okay, I guess we're just not gonna be able to get out of here. Oh, that sucks. Well, hopefully there's another chance. So uh, that's when Siren eventually uh, undoes what happened to Slimer, and so eventually just what ends up happening is Slimer is to figure out a way to open back up this door, and but this door is now like swung open, and so Eduardo opens up his like container to finally breathe, and so like all the ghosts are coming out of the containment unit, and so what ends up happening is Kylie goes and chucks Fenris into the containment unit door, and that freaking smacks into Cert, and that kind of pushes everyone back. Like it's the Slimer thing all over again. And so that's when they finally figure out how to be able to close the door, because Egon, Roland, and Garrett are back to normal. So Egon uses like a wrench to be able to just close this door again, luckily. Lucky for them. So like Kylie just figures out that it's like, well, like things of like ghost against ghost would have to equal that these ghosts would all get pushed back, and plus also like once the ghost is kind of clearly in the containment unit, that like everybody would go back to normal, and so that would solve all this. So like huzzah for the knowledge of everyone just being like severely paranoid. So on this last episode is to also be another like, hey, we caught this ghost years ago. So the very beginning of this is to have a thing called a grundle, who is to like juicingly come out of this like tree of sorts, or this broken tree, and all of a sudden make its way to some little kid's window, and it's like, ha. So Ghostbusters, of course, are being called, and so we have this mother who's with her child, and so the mother is to mention that this thing was to mention to come out and play. I guess is what the thing was to say. So Kylie is all of a sudden freaking out because she remembers this thing that this ghost was to say, "Come out and play, child, come out and play." And so like Kylie's remembering that it's like this has to be something like she knows about it. She's looking in the computer to try to find what it is. So what ends up happening is we coincidentally have, out of all the episodes, we have Roland's younger brother, Casey, who is to come into the firehouse and go and trap Slimer into this refrigerator. And it seems like Casey is pulling pranks on everybody, like putting a broom into Garrett's wheelchair, uh, putting earwax into Egon's like samples and all kinds of stuff. Uh, but yeah, so Kylie is to eventually find out or figure out that this thing is a grundle, and so she, of course, tells Egon about this. And Egon is like, well, that's impossible because we had trapped a grundle before. It has to be something else. So, uh, like the original Ghostbusters had trapped this thing years ago, like 10 years ago or something like that. So, uh, so there was to be a thing that I forgot. So the Ghostbusters were to go out, and eventually they had faced this new Grundle. And what ended up happening was there was a rainy spot, and so we had Garrett who ends up like wanting to request a windshield or like a windshield wiper or like something because like everybody's getting really soaked, and so the Grundle ends up hitting Garrett in the back and freaking like breaking this like piece of wood that this Grundle had. So eventually, like Roland is to be like kind of like chucked almost off this bizarrish cliff. So they go into like this neighborhood area to all of a sudden this like cliff-ish like area because eventually they end up finding this like this oozed up tree, and they take a sample of it. And so evidently Roland is to be like hanging off this cliff. Kylie goes and drags him in, and so Roland is to owe Kylie one. So transition us now to Kylie's like, hey, you owe me one, so you're gonna do this for me. So Roland is to figure out how to be able to take a ghost from out of the containment unit into a like this little caged spot where they are to be able to talk to this thing for X amount of time. So Roland was to take out one ghost that was to be like from the intro, so they could use that ghost, I guess, and not worry about that getting sued. But so, I'm pulling at that string. I'm just trying to figure it out. Like it's bothering me. Uh, so so eventually the Grundle is to appear, and so Kylie is trying to figure out like how that the Grundle there's another one out there, and the Grundle is like, well, there's no one like me, but then also Kylie's to remember that she had a best friend named Jack, because Grundle is like, oh yeah, like I did turn somebody, and it was Jack, and I guess like he had a much more better hold on this whole Grundle thing than anybody else was. Maybe he was a Grundle for a lot longer than anyone else, or whichever. So all of a sudden, Kylie's remember when she was a kid, and all of a sudden she like kept like avoiding the Grundle, but then eventually Jack got sucked into this whole thing, and Jack ended up becoming the Grundle, and so uh, so eventually like Egon is to go and check because he's hearing sounds, and then all of a sudden, like, the Grundle is to be put back in the containment unit. So, eventually, the Ghostbusters are to be called for like a late night bust or whatever, and because of course we're gonna have like these night things going on because the Grundles can continue to go after people. So Roland is to kind of check on Casey, and eventually he's gonna go off to go and do his job, and Casey is to follow after him, and kind of also just perform all these pranks like per usual. So uh, eventually what ends up happening is we eventually have Kylie, who is to try to uh, ask the Grundle about Jack again, and like figure out how they can like get to Jack or talk to him or whatever. So what eventually happens is Casey is to eventually knock out the power to free Grundle, and so now they're like, okay, we let two Grundles out. There's two Grundles now. So what the heck are we going to do? So Egon is eventually going to discipline Kylie. Like, I don't know how many times, like, Kylie just gets into trouble. Like, that's the thing about her. She always gets in trouble. But, like, she also saves a lot of the guys also. So I guess that could probably even out. But, like, Kylie gets in trouble a lot to where like Egon would just be like, dude, you're freaking fired. Like like I don't know how many times you get into this like these things where you're just like this stubborn person that has to figure something out. And like Egon should always be involved in this, and he isn't because they want to go and do their own thing. So eventually Casey is to go on home, and the Grundles are to, of course, go to Casey's home and like, yeah, we definitely want this kid because this kid like is a burden. Because like we have Garrett who's like, oh my god, I can't wait till this Casey kid is just out of our hair. Like, good god. And Roland is just like, oh no, he's such a great kid. Yeah, that's because you're Roland and you just think the best of everyone, even if you shouldn't believe that. So, the Ghostbusters are starting to realize that, like, hey man, like, they're going for Casey, and so that leads to how the Ghostbusters going to Casey's house, and coincidentally, they're right. So, they go into the home and they try to protect Casey, but Casey has already been turned, and so he's just kind of running through the town, being a half Grundle. And so eventually, I think Garrett scoops Casey up, and Casey is to be like scared as this Grundle, and he's crying. And so eventually, the older Grundle is to eventually go and grab Kylie, and eventually just say, "Yeah, I finally got like the one kid that I wanted for so long." And so now Kylie is to get her like proton gun away from her, but eventually she goes and grabs it back, and then goes and traps the Grundle yet again. And so this time around, I guess since Kylie faced her fears and got the revenge that she like needed or whatever to, I guess, let like Jack's spirit be free, and now Jack is a much older guy. And so we find out that everybody's fine, that no one's a Grundle, and like it would have been cool if they would have just like, yeah, there's still another Grundle out there. Like that would have been nice. But yeah, so that's what happens at the end of this episode. So yeah, I guess that means I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching these. Thank you for if you watch this whole thing. I really do appreciate it. I like these. It's not one of those where it's just like, oh, I found something that was trending. Like, it was a coincidence. I was just, like, grasping at straws. Coincidentally, people like this. Thank you for liking these. Or thank you for being a person that watches these. You don't have to like them. Just watch them. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.